Hi everyone, and welcome to this video about primary sources and modifying primary sources and using primary sources inside the classroom. So primary source, so that original firsthand account about something that's happened in history. We certainly see primary sources in a variety of ways: oral history, objects, photographs, documents, newspapers, census records, diaries, journals, inventories. All those things are primary sources. So our first question is, why use them? Why should we use primary sources? Because, I'll be frank and I'll be honest, and I know that if you've ever worked with primary sources, you would agree with me 100%. They're challenging reading for our students. Well, I would agree with that, but I do think that the advantages to using primary sources far outweigh those challenges. And just like anything, our students can be trained in how to read primary sources. None of us were born knowing how to do this. We all learned it, and so our students certainly can too, even though it's a challenge. So what are some reasons why we should use primary sources? Well, we're always trying to build students' thinking skills, and I really think that using primary sources help to do this. They help students with deductive reasoning and problem-solving skills, especially if we set up things like the historic scene investigation that you'll be reading more about as you go on through. When they have a series of documents or other things about a historic event, and they're trying to figure out what exactly went on, that really builds thinking skills. So that's one advantage. Second, primary sources are real. A lot of times we read things in a textbook, and textbooks tend to sanitize history or be preaching or have bias, and so they're not as good as the documents themselves. So if we want to get real, using primary sources is the way to do that. Primary sources also help with active learning. As we do things like the historic scene investigation, they ask students to draw their own conclusions. A lot of times textbooks try to lead you into a particular way of thinking, and primary sources don't do that. You have those sources, you have other information, and you have to form your own conclusions. So I think that provides some active learning there as well. Also, the danger of the single story that we read about earlier. If we can get primary sources from both sides of a particular issue, we've got a much better balanced view than what we had if we only see one thing. So certainly primary sources can help end the single story and provide the balanced view of history that we want to try to do. So why else, Steve? I'm not convinced. Give me another reason. Well, take a look at your screen, and this is a question from the GED test. And so what we have here is, lo and behold, a primary source. This passage summarizes a speech by John Quincy Adams in 1839, 50 years after ratifying the U.S. Constitution. So we've got this primary source inside this question. And then we've got this question that says, which statement from the excerpt, or in other words, this portion of the speech, gives evidence that John Quincy Adams believed in local control of local issues? So, excuse me, this particular question is all about the primary source. We're reading this reading the speech from John Quincy Adams, and we are trying to decide exactly what it means and what evidence from that supports the statement that he believed in local control of local issues. And he certainly did. What an amazing man. He was served as president for one term, and he went back to his local community there in Braintree, Massachusetts, and he served in the U.S. House of Representatives for years after he was president, until his death. He actually died in the House chamber years later. So quite an amazing man, and I would think he would probably look on his career in the House of Representatives as being one of the highlights of his career. But that's another story for a different day. At any respect, primary sources, students are going to see them on high school equivalency tests. Here's one example. Here's another one. This is again from the GED high school equivalency test. We have at the top an excerpt from President Hoover in 1929. We have an excerpt from President Franklin Roosevelt's inaugural address in 1933. And it asks us a question to really compare these two snippets from primary sources. How are they alike? How are they different? These are tough questions, and if students have had little, if any, practice in analyzing primary sources, they will struggle mightily to try to answer questions like this on the high school equivalency test. So if you're looking for another reason they're going to see them on high school equivalency test, would be another reason to use primary sources inside your classroom. So I do think that just grabbing a primary source and running with it, especially early on, is a hard thing for us to do with our students and hard for our students to understand. So what I'm going to suggest instead is that you modify the primary sources that you're going to use. And let me go ahead and shift out, and I'm going to share another document here so we can get a better feel for that. There we go. Hey, it worked. All right, so what we've done with this particular document, and this you have access to, this is part of a historical scene investigation that I created about what really happened at the Battle of Lexington on April 19 in 1775. So this comes from a longer document. So I would say starting out, start small. Maybe just start out with a paragraph from a document. And don't try to read 10 pages of a historic document from the get-go. So what I've done with this is I've explained to students here at the top, this is a diary entry from a British officer, and I've let them know that I've modified it. I've taken out some of the things to make it a bit shorter. It just covers the highlights of what I'm trying to get at. I've got a date on it. I've also got a head note. And a head note really provides some context to how the document fits into this. And you can find this background information in a lot of places on the internet, or if you use the resources that we're suggesting, these have already been done, so you don't have to do the heavy lifting. But this says the head note, the battles of Lexington and Concord, fought on April 19, 1775, kicked off the Revolutionary War. Tensions had been building for years between the colonists and the British authorities, especially in Massachusetts. On the night of April 18, 1775, hundreds of British troops marched from Boston to nearby Concord, or if you're in Massachusetts, Concord, in order to take some guns the colonists had stored. Paul Revere and others riders sounded the alarm, and the colonial militiamen, who were amateur soldiers that got together once a week on the town common, drank some adult beverages, and practiced firing their guns and tried to learn how to be soldiers, began assembling to intercept British troops. And the British Army was the best trained in the world, which it was. The British infantry could fire 3 shots a minute. The colonial militias, well, they were in big time over their head, and they realized they're trying to fight the style that the British did. So at any rate, the head note provides some background and context to the historical document that we're going to look at. Then I've got a focus question, something to guide students as they read. Why did British troops fire on American soldiers? And so then we've got the actual part of the document. This is 2 short paragraphs. I've also set up a vocabulary box where I have defined some terms that students might find difficult, like, grenadier, what the heck is that? That's a type of British soldier. Or a ford we think about as a car, but a ford is also a shallow place where it's easy to cross a river. And a common, we might think, oh, we have a lot in common, but common for this definition was the grassy area in the center of town, kind of a park where the colonial militia assembled here. So this is a way to modify documents to make them easier to read. And the big thing that I would suggest is, instead of diving into documents first, you may want to start with pictures. What do they say? A picture's worth 1,000 words. So if I was teaching, I would start out with the picture, and we'd roll through this and try to figure out what story is the picture telling us. This is a picture from done by a lithographer, Amos Doolittle, who was someone who came down fairly soon after the battle and assembled eyewitness accounts of what had happened. He talked to a lot of people, and historians regard this particular picture as one of the best out there in terms of showing what actually happened with the Battle of Lexington on the Lexington Green there in the early morning of April 19. So start with this. Ask students, what do you notice? What do you see? You might define things, because you see like this brown cloud here in the middle. And like, what the heck is that? But that's the smoke from the weapons of the British as they're firing there. And so we can see the story has changed a lot over the years. Speaking of different stories, we can see the colonial militia is not having too good of a time here. We see several dead and wounded here on the field. They're fleeing for their lives, and wisely so, because they're facing the best trained army in the world. And it's only later over time where the myth of that, the Minuteman farmer that's defiantly raising his fist in the midst of the British soldier came about, but that was certainly not the way it happened. These guys got the heck out of Dodge, and wisely so, because if they stood there and fought in the line the way the British did, they would have been annihilated. And they did, as it stood, had several casualties. George Washington learned from what happened in the French and Indian War that if you fight the way the British want to, you're going to get killed. But if you fight the way the Indians do, the Native Americans, you are going to do a whole lot better when you engage in more guerrilla type tactics where you're hiding and not shooting from behind stone walls and boulders, which is what they did as the British troops headed to Concord. That way you're going to win. But if you fight the way the British want to, things are going to be messy, and the British are going to wipe the field with you. So some interesting things to note. I get excited when I do these, talking about some of these other things that have gone on. So let me shift back to the PowerPoint. So I'm going to shift back here. There we go. Okay, so we've talked about how to modify some primary sources there as well. We've talked about starting with a picture. A great resource where the heavy lifting has already been done is the historic scene investigations. And there's several of these. I attach a link to the website, and it's very effective. Andy Weatherly, an instructor at AB Tech, said that he took this and really rode that pony to his students, successfully passing the high school equivalency. He did a number of these with the students, and they were successful in passing the GED test, which for my money is the most challenging of the 3 high school equivalency tests that are out there today. So the historic scene investigation gives you the documents, does the heavy lifting, and helps you get set up for helping the students to navigate these primary sources. So I hope that you're coming away from this really with a couple things. One, that students need to know how to digest and analyze and give strong analysis to primary source documents. So that's really a key thing. They're going to see these on high school equivalency tests. And I think it's just a lot of fun. Reading history textbooks are really not all that exciting, with some rare exceptions, but I think for the most part, these books are not all that great. So it's really going to help your students, and they're going to do better. And it's a good life skill too. If they can analyze a historic document, that will certainly help them with the analysis skills that they will apply in their daily lives as they face challenges as well. So I would strongly encourage you, if primary sources are not part of your classroom instruction now, please make some changes and put these inside your instructional toolkit. And I do hope you find some great things and some great resources inside this section that will help you to do this. So thanks for your kind attention while watching the video, and look forward to talking some more with you as we go throughout the course.